Hello, and welcome to the 7th episode of Season 12 of the Dark Money Files, in which we shine a light into a murky world. I'm Ray Blake, and with me is my co-host, friend and business partner, Graham Barrow. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Ray. So, Ray, what are we looking at today, then?
The new UK PEPs guidance, Graham.
Oh, it sounds like another UK-centric episode.
Well, yeah, but it does chime with the recent US executive order on debanking, and as we'll see, it has requirements outside of the UK too.
Well, fair enough then. But before we begin, let's just first mention Risk Alert 247. It continues to support the podcast and also increasingly, as you well know, occupy some or quite a lot of our working hours.
Well, quite, yes. Now, one of the benefits of being a Risk Alert 247 customer is being informed on the anomalous incorporations at Companies House.
It does, Ray. I mean, are they still happening?
Well, yes, Graham, as you well know, and at a frightening scale.
Yeah, I know. We actually spend a lot of time looking at daily incorporations in real time, identifying anomalous and suspicious networks as they're created.
So that when you're approached by a single company for onboarding, you can be aware of the networks it might be part of.
Yes, and actually, to be very, very honest about this, you, Ray, thank you, put this all together into a monthly intelligence report, although it's starting to look more like a book, called Risk Alert Radar, that goes to all of our Risk Alert 247 clients, along with the spreadsheets that allow them to screen against the companies and networks that we have listed in that report.
Yes, and feedback suggests it's a very valuable tool on top of the system's other benefits.
It is indeed. So let's move on to PEPs. And we're talking here about the final guidance released in July by the FCA based on its review of how firms are dealing with PEPs. You will remember, better than most, that this review was commenced at the same time the new UK domestic PEP rules came into force at the start of 2024. The review was published in July 2024 and feedback was invited, and this new guidance on the back of that was published in July 2025.
Yeah, that's right, Graham. And those new rules in 2024 were the requirement to distinguish between domestic PEPs and foreign PEPs, and to implement a presumption that domestic PEPs carried lower risks unless there were other risk factors beyond them simply being PEPs.
Now, the 2024 review kicks off by effectively recommitting to this approach and puts it in terms of firms balancing financial crime controls with the need for good customer treatment.
Yeah, now this sounds like a restatement of the risk-based approach, but there's a number of points in the new guidance that build on the 2024 changes and effectively, for me, constrain the risk-based decisions firms used to be able to make.
So how so, Ray?
Well, as an example, Regulation 35(9) says that where a person who was a PEP is no longer one, then firms have to continue to apply the requirements for at least 12 months or for such longer period as you consider appropriate to address risks of money laundering or terrorist financing in relation to that person. We all understand that, I think. But the new guidance says it's necessary to review PEP classification after a PEP leaves office and to consider declassifying them in a timely manner. The guidance is critical of firms applying periods longer than 12 months. Now, the implication for 35(9) for me is that you must do it for 12 months, but you have the ability to stop doing it thereafter. Now, this guidance goes further in specifying that you must consider it, and lickety-split to boot.
And furthermore, the guidance states that relatives and close associates, RCAs, are not required to have a 12-month waiting period, and you should consider declassifying them as soon as the PEP leaves office.
Now, consider declassifying and declassify are two different things, Graham. There's no expectation that you should always declassify, is there?
No, and neither should there be, in my humble opinion. But it's going to be more important to record the consideration, I think, and to justify and record your decision of whether to declassify, or especially whether you do not declassify.
And there's more toughening up too, by which I don't mean the kind of toughening up where we strengthen our controls to make it harder for the bad guys. For instance, the guidance notes that a fairly select list of family members is specified in the regs as being identifiable as in-scope relatives of a PEP. And we've always considered this as a minimum scope and often decided to look at more remote relatives.
And now we can't?
Well, we can, but only in cases where we perceive a higher risk. And we'd need to carefully document our justification for going beyond the closest relatives.
And there's also a requirement in this guidance that subsidiaries and branches outside the UK apply the same result to UK PEPs and their RCAs, unless this is not permitted by local law.
Now, hang on, though. A UK PEP is only a domestic PEP in the UK, no? If you're managing a relationship with a UK PEP in, say, Germany, then the UK PEP is a foreign PEP, surely?
Well, perhaps so, but the FCA is clear that you still need to afford that UK PEP the latitude you would if they were a domestic PEP being serviced in the UK. I'll quote them from the guidance directly because this is important, and the quote reads, "The parent undertaking must ensure that those subsidiary undertakings and branches apply measures equivalent to those required by these regulations as far as permitted under the law of the third country. As such, the legislation requires that the starting point for the risk assessment of a UK PEP is that they present a lower level of risk than a non-UK PEP, and that assessment is applied across the group unless that is not permitted by the local law in that jurisdiction." End quote.
So the language we've been using around domestic and foreign PEPs isn't right then, is it? It seems we have to think instead of UK and non-UK PEPs. That's underlined by another July publication, the NCA's and FCA's Joint Economic Crime System Priorities, a list of 9 wide-ranging criminal typologies identified with the help of private sector bodies and the Treasury as priority areas to be addressed. The second of the 9 is transaction flows and corporate structures associated with the abuse of power by overseas politically exposed persons. My emphasis, not theirs. But it does seem clear that the desired focus is those PEPs that are outside the UK border.
And yet, Ray, there is no escaping the legal requirement that enhanced due diligence, EDD, must, to some extent, be applied to every PEP.
No, and the guidance is at pains to restate that, Graham. There's this slight act of psychological gymnastics required to assume as your starting point that UK PEPs present lower risk than foreign ones, and to have in place explicit policies and procedures that enforce that, while at the same time making sure you engage a high risk control.
Yeah, so when we say lower risk, we're using that in a kind of Einsteinian relativity way, aren't we?
It's relative, absolutely. I mean, it's hard to see how you could deliver the required enhanced ongoing monitoring for any PEP without having them sit in your high-risk population.
But if they are UK PEPs, they will be low risk, high risk.
Indeed, unless there are other risk factors not related to their PEP status, in which case you can indeed consider them high risk, high risk.
Oh, but you would want to carefully document your reasoning if that is the case.
That's certainly the way the wind seems to be blowing, Graham.
There's some very clear, but I think quite difficult to apply guidance on EDD for lower risk PEPs and their RCAs. The FCA guidance says that in these situations a firm may, quote, seek to make no inquiries of a PEP's family or known close associates except those necessary to establish whether such a relationship does exist.
That doesn't sound like EDD.
No, but then it states that firms may, and I'm quoting again, take less intrusive and less exhaustive steps to establish the source of wealth and the source of funds of PEPs, family members or known close associates of a PEP. For example, only use information already available to the institution, such as transaction records or publicly available information, and do not make further inquiries of the individual unless anomalies arise.
Okay, so there's some sort of EDD there, but what about having any kind of certainty around source of wealth?
Well, yeah, it's that thing about, well, how do the anomalies arise if you don't make further inquiries? But
Indeed.
I'm going to quote the guidance because it says, and this is going to take me a minute or two,
Okay.
it is necessary to seek source of wealth information.
Phew!
To take a big run up at that one.
Yeah.
But it does continue. Quote again. But in all lower risk cases, especially when dealing with products that carry a lower risk of laundering the proceeds of corruption, firms should minimise the amount of information they collect and how they verify this information provided, for example, via information sources it has available.
I see what you mean now by clear but difficult to apply. It's hard to see how that can really give you much confidence that you know the source of wealth very well.
Yeah, wouldn't say it's been done particularly well previously, would you?
No.
But there you go. And there's at least a suggestion here that in your business-wide risk assessment, you need to have looked specifically at the laundering of proceeds of corruption across your product range, whereas I suspect most risk assessments don't distinguish between different predicate crimes in their money laundering assessments.
Now, look, Graham, I fear we're coming across as a bit cynical about all of this. The truth is, as an industry, we've been a bit trigger happy with the PEP button for quite a while now. I think firms have found it easy to err on the side of caution and label sometimes quite marginal figures as PEPs. And that's often led to people being denied service or facing unnecessary and intrusive and often unexplained due diligence.
Yeah, well, we might say undue diligence.
Well, yeah.
Reality. But even worse, many firms have found it more expedient simply to say no to PEPs and just refuse to offer them services.
Well, isn't that their right? I mean, if I own a sweet shop, I have the right to deny service to anyone I like.
Yeah, but being denied service in a sweet shop doesn't entail the same kind of knock-on effects and difficulties as being denied banking facilities. And the consumer duty angle is valid. Financial services firms provide vital economic and social facilities which anyone would struggle if denied them.
Yeah, now I tend to think that framing this as a consumer duty issue is the right way to go. By contrast, the recent US executive order forbidding American institutions from debanking the right reads like rather naked peak.
Can't imagine that in America today.
Just imagine.
It's just extraordinary. But I'm going to say yes to all of that. But what I can't get past, Ray, however hard I try, is this fundamental concept that UK PEPs are not inherently as risky as non-UK PEPs.
I agree with you, Graham. FATF actually allows this distinction between domestic and foreign PEPs on the grounds that if a PEP is operating in a foreign country, the institution may not have much first-hand knowledge or direct access to information about variables such as what a reasonable income would be for a foreign public official at a particular level or in a particular position. So this can make it more difficult to assess information, both when you're opening an account and during your ongoing monitoring of the customer relationship. Thus, the greater risk you can afford to a foreign PEP, as per FATF.
Well, yeah, that's a fair point, but presumably FATF would regard a UK PEP being serviced abroad to be a foreign PEP, even if the institution were a subsidiary of a UK firm.
Well, yeah. I mean, having a UK parent might be an aid in understanding some of the stuff about reasonable incomes and so forth. But you could make the same argument for the UK branch of, say, a Japanese bank. And it's clear that the FCA guidance wouldn't see this as any justification for treating a Japanese PEP in the UK the same way as a UK PEP. So this insistence on the presumption that UK PEPs are inherently less risky than non-UK PEPs, wherever those UK PEPs bank, does seem at odds with the international guidance, as well as being an absolute gift to satirists.
Yeah, let's just pass over that.
I think so.
Just to avoid any sort of litigation. But Ray, I want to stick with this global perspective because most global banks will want to maintain a globally consistent approach to its PEP treatment. And this new guidance rather puts a spanner in that, doesn't it?
Yes, in three particular ways, actually. First, there's the insistence on the special presumption for UK PEPs that overseas institutions offering services in the UK are required to observe. And secondly, there's the requirement to apply strictly the UK definitions of PEP roles and relatives, which certainly aren't completely consistent across different countries.
So firms might need to have specific new carve-outs from global policies and procedures to allow for this, and they might need to look at their PEP screening vendors, or at least their PEP screening lists, to ensure that where the UK is concerned, there is no creep beyond the UK definitions. You said in three particular ways, Ray, so what's the third?
Well, thirdly, Graham, some global organisations apply across the world the most stringent requirements they face anywhere. Now, often that means they apply the once a PEP, always a PEP principle globally because there are some jurisdictions that don't recognise PEP declassification. Again, they'll have to look at carving out a UK exception if they're doing business in the UK.
Ooh, it certainly seems that erring on the side of caution is both no longer in vogue and no longer applicable.
Well, yeah, it does seem that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
OK, let's finally turn to PEPs in the context of legal entities. Where a PEP is a UBO of a company, we have to apply PEP-style controls to that business relationship, yes?
Well, Ray, yes and no. Sorry. But the guidance says you have to identify when a PEP is a beneficial owner of a company, but that you don't have to treat that company as a PEP unless it is clear that the PEP beneficial owner exercises significant control over the company or the ability to use their own funds in relation to the entity.
How will you know?
How will you know? Well, in the first place, you'd inquire with the company and clarify the PEP's role in the day-to-day activities of the company and their role on the board. General media and news searches will tell you if the individual is active in representing the company in anything other than a figurehead capacity.
One other clarification in the guidance is that the PEP's fellow directors and shareholders shouldn't automatically be considered as close associates of the PEP unless you have information that suggests a broader relationship.
And actually this guidance sits much more comfortably with me than the whole domestic foreign business. It is letting firms have a little bit more freedom in applying their risk-based approach.
I agree. So that's our UK PEPs update. What's coming next, Graham?
Well, Ray, one of the areas we don't look at too much is the civil enforcement of incorporation rules, which is done in the UK through the Insolvency Service. I think a lot of people just think they look after insolvencies, but they actually do an awful lot more than that. And they've just published a 5-year strategy document, so I think that's well worth a look.
I'm looking forward to it.